The progress bar said 73%. Good, we're 3/4 of the way there. Despite the progress, Linwei Ding's heart was beating through his chest. His smartwatch showed that his heart rate was elevated. It was working hard like he was on a run. But this was no exercise. He was sitting at his work desk, inside the Googleplex in Mountain View, California, simply watching the status bar crawl forward on his MacBook screen. Outside, the December sun was already low in the sky, turning the glass buildings orange. The campus here at Google looked pretty picturesque. Bicycles leaning against racks, engineers walking between buildings with their lanyards swinging from their necks. His coworkers were laughing near the micro kitchen down the hall. This was just a normal Thursday at Google. But for Linwei, nothing about this Thursday was ordinary at all. He had a one-way ticket to Beijing in his bag. His resignation letter was already drafted, sitting in a folder on his desktop, ready to submit. And on his laptop screen, some of the most valuable artificial intelligence secrets in the world were being copied, file by file, into a personal computer. 78%. This felt like watching paint dry. Every second seemed to drag on. He could feel the sweat forming on his palms, enough that his fingers felt slick against the trackpad. He wiped his right hand on his thigh underneath the desk and glanced sideways down the row of monitors. Nobody was watching. In a building full of people who stare at screens all day, nobody ever really notices what's on yours. 84% now. Hey Leon, you good? Linwei was startled by the voice coming from behind. Leon is his nickname. It's what everyone calls him here in the US. He turned around fast to see who was approaching. It was a coworker, a guy from his team walking up with a coffee. But the timing was terrible. Linwei could feel the blood rush into his face. He turned in his chair and forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine, he said as he repositioned his laptop to hide the download progress bar. The coworker tilted his head a little. You sure? You're looking kind of pale. Linwei coughed, not because he needed to cough, but because it bought him a second to think. He glanced back at the screen just long enough to register the bar. 91%. Hurry up, he thought to himself. Actually, now that you mention it, I am feeling a little under the weather all of a sudden. He put his hand on his stomach and nodded as if confirming something to himself. Yeah, I think I might head home early. His coworker shrugged. All right, get some rest, man. It does seem like something is going around. And then he walked off. The whole interaction lasted maybe 15 seconds. But for Linwei, it felt like he'd been holding his breath for a full minute. He exhaled slowly through his nose and turned back to the screen. 100%. Finally, he whispers to himself. He closed the laptop and slid the MacBook into his backpack. He pushed his chair in and then stood up. No rush. Be natural. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Just do not rush. Rushing draws attention, he kept thinking to himself. He slung the bag over one shoulder and walked towards the exit. But the moment he turned the corner and the office was behind him, the calm act fell away and his vision narrowed. The campus was full of people, but he didn't see any of them. Not the woman on the bench, not the group at the crosswalk, not the shuttle pulling away from the curb. All of that was a blur to him. His entire focus was just getting to the car in the parking lot. When he finally reached his car, he dropped into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. And for a few seconds, he just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at a row of perfectly manicured hedges. His heart was hammering. His shirt was damp. He'd been doing this for over a year now, and it never got easier. Every single time felt like the first time. Even so, he felt it was all worth it. He started the engine and pulled out of the lot. Another successful extraction. What was being downloaded to that laptop and into the personal cloud account that he'd been uploading to for the past 18 months was the architectural blueprint for Google's artificial intelligence platform. The custom chips, the networking hardware, the software that turns thousands of individual processors into a single supercomputer capable of training AI models that the entire world is now racing to build. This is technology that represents a decade of research and development. Technology that governments go through great lengths to keep from other nations. And Linwei Ding had just walked out the front door with it. Now let's go back a few years. Linwei was born in China. He studied at UC San Diego, and on May 13th, 2019, he was hired by Google as a software engineer. His assignment was the company's supercomputing data centers. These are the machines specifically designed for training and running large AI models. His job was developing the software that made Google's TPUs and GPU systems work more efficiently together for machine learning workloads. In simpler terms, he helped make the machines run faster and more efficiently. And because of that role, he had access to the blueprints for everything. Now, Google isn't careless with this type of information. They implement badge access, surveillance cameras, network monitoring, and data loss prevention tools designed to flag unusual file transfers. But that's the thing about insider threats. The assumption is that people inside of the building are supposed to be there. And Linwei had a badge, a login, and a job description that gave him access to some of the most sensitive technical documents in the company. So no one was suspicious of him because he was doing his job. There was no reason to question anything. So for 3 years, Linwei was just another engineer. He did his work, he went to meetings, he collected his paycheck. But something in the spring of 2022 changed. Whether it was his personal ambition or an opportunity presented itself, or he faced some pressure from people back home in China. We don't quite know, but we know that something did change. And on May 21st, 2022, Linwei Ding made a decision that would change the course of his life. So Linwei didn't just drag files from a Google server into a thumb drive. That would have got flagged immediately. That's too obvious. Instead, he found a workaround. He copied data from Google's internal source files into an Apple Notes application on his company-issued MacBook. Then he converted those notes into PDFs. Once that was done, he uploaded the PDFs from Google's network into his personal Google Cloud account. This was a 3-step shell game designed to dodge Google's data loss prevention systems, and it worked. The first upload was the beginning of a pattern that would continue for the next year. He downloaded over 1,000 files, more than 2,000 pages of confidential technical documentation covering the architecture of Google's TPU chips and their GPU systems. And almost immediately, the phone calls from China started. In June of 2022, just weeks after that first download, the CEO of a Beijing-based AI startup called Rongzhu reached out. The company needed a chief technology officer. They were looking for someone who understood AI infrastructure at the highest level, someone who knew how the best systems in the world were actually built from the inside out. They offered Linwei about $14,800 a month, plus stock and annual bonuses. Linwei didn't mention any of this to Google. By October, he was on a plane to China. He landed in Beijing and stepped into a world that was hungry for exactly what he had. China's tech sector had been trying to build its own AI supercomputing infrastructure for a while now, and the US government had started restricting the export of advanced chips, choking off their supply chain. Chinese companies needed another way to close that gap. And here was Linwei Ding, a Google engineer with the entire playbook sitting in a cloud account, walking into investor meetings with a briefcase full of answers. He stayed in China for nearly 5 months, from late October of 2022 all the way through March of 2023. He attended meetings, he pitched investors, he built relationships with people who had money and wanted exactly what he was selling. And the whole time, 6,000 miles away in Mountain View, California, his badge was scanning at the entrance to his Google building every morning. The door would beep, the turnstile would click, and somebody would walk through, but that somebody wasn't Linwei. He'd arranged for another Google employee to swipe his badge for him, creating a digital trail that made it look like he was showing up to work every day. If anyone had checked the surveillance cameras, they would have seen a different face completely. But nobody checked. I mean, why would they? When Linwei finally flew back to California in spring of 2023, he wasn't coming home to settle down. No, he was coming back to go even bigger. On May 30th, 2023, he registered a new company in Shanghai. He called it Zhishuan Technology, and he put his own name at the top as CEO. His pitch to investors was pretty straightforward. He told them that he could build an AI supercomputer by copying and modifying Google's technology. He said he was one of maybe 10 people in the entire world who had the knowledge to pull it off. And in his newly found company's own internal documents, the language was even more direct. It said, and this is according to the court filings, "We have experience with Google's 10,000 card computational power platform. We just need to replicate and upgrade it." Just replicate it, like it was a recipe that he had written down on a napkin, not stealing from the company that he was working for. He also applied to a government-sponsored talent program in Shanghai. These programs are designed by the Chinese government to recruit researchers and engineers working overseas. In his application, Linwei wrote that his company's products could help China develop computing power on par with international standards. The FBI has described these sort of programs as mechanisms for transferring American technology and intellectual property to China. And Linwei was positioning his company to do just that. By November 2023, Linwei's company was accepted into Miracle Plus. This is a well-known Chinese business incubator. Linwei flew to Beijing for the conference, and he stood on stage in front of a room full of investors. He introduced himself as CEO and laid out his vision for building a Chinese AI supercomputing platform using the technology that he'd taken from Google. His name was on the program, his face was in the photos, and his pitch was on the record. On that same day, back in Mountain View, someone was swiping his badge at the Google building again. He was 6,000 miles away, standing on a stage telling Chinese investors that he could steal Google's most valuable technology, while a digital version of him was clocking in to work every day at the very company that he was stealing from. While he was still in China, Linwei started downloading more confidential files from Google's internal network. This time he used a second personal Google account, a different one from the account that he'd been using for the past year and a half. Maybe he figured two accounts were harder to trace than one, or maybe he just wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Either way, Google's monitoring systems caught it, and they flagged it this time. And for the first time in 18 months, someone was now looking into what Linwei Ding was doing. On December 8th, a Google investigator reached out. Linwei was still in China when he got the message on his phone. He read it, and then he read it again. Google's security team wanted to know about the downloads. Why was he transferring internal files to a personal account? For a moment, everything went quiet. The conference rooms, the investor pitches, and the startup spreadsheets all faded into the background. This was the moment that he'd imagined 100 times over. The tap on the shoulder, the question he didn't want to answer. He was standing in the middle of a life that he built entirely on stolen property. These Chinese investors thought he was a genius, and now the company that he'd been stealing from for a year and a half was on the other end of this message asking him to explain himself. His mind went through all the different options. He could ignore it, he could hope it went away, he could call a lawyer, he could come clean and throw himself at the mercy of a company that might or might not hand him over to the FBI. But Linwei had been lying to Google since May of 2022. He thought to himself, what's one more lie? Let's see if we can keep this thing going. He told the investigator that he downloaded those files as evidence of his work at Google. He was just building his personal portfolio, revamping his resume. That's all. The investigator had him sign a self-deletion affidavit. This is a legal document swearing that he had permanently destroyed all the copies of Google's confidential information. The investigator accepted his explanation, and the case was closed. He still had complete access to everything, every file, every system, every door. 20 more days. That's all he needed to finish what he started. On December 14th, he booked a one-way ticket from San Francisco to Beijing. There was no return flight. He planned to leave for good. In the final days of December, he sat at his personal computer and pulled everything down from his cloud accounts, file after file landing on his hard drive. The TPU architecture, the GPU cluster designs, the networking cards, the orchestration software, 18 months of stolen work. All of it he was consolidating into one place, on one machine, ready to travel to China. On December 26th, he emailed his manager and resigned. His letter was short and professional. In his mind, the exit was clean. Resign, fly out, land in Beijing, and never look back. Start fresh as the CEO of your own company with Google's entire AI playbook sitting in your laptop bag. Nobody would ever know. Nobody would ever connect the dots. But just 3 days after submitting his resignation letter, on December 29th, somebody at Google found the photos. Linwei Ding, a software engineer from Google, standing on stage with a microphone in his hand, introducing himself as the CEO of Shanghai Zhishuan Technology, a company whose entire business plan was built on replicating Google's AI infrastructure. The photos were right there. I mean, his face, his name, his title, all of it public. He was caught red-handed. Now suddenly, that excuse about him building his portfolio or revamping his resume looked a little different. Google's security team moved fast. They suspended his network access, and they remotely locked his laptop, and then they called the FBI. On January 6, 2024, FBI agents pulled up to a quiet residential street in Newark, California. They stepped out of their vehicles and knocked on Linwei Ding's front door with a federal search warrant. They went through the house, room by room. They took his personal computer, and then they took his hard drives. And there, they found all the files. His one-way flight to Beijing was scheduled for the very next morning. But that plane would take off from SFO without him. For 2 months, Linwei stayed in Newark while the FBI built its case around him. He was still a free man, technically, but the walls were already up. On the morning of March 6, 2024, federal agents came back to that same front door and placed him under arrest. That afternoon, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced the indictment at an American Bar Association conference in San Francisco. He was being charged of 4 counts of theft of trade secrets. Prosecutors had drawn a direct line between Linwei's actions and the Chinese government's talent recruitment programs. This was no longer a story about a disloyal employee anymore. This was now a case of nation-state espionage. On January 30th, 2026, Linwei stood in a federal courtroom in San Francisco as a jury returned its verdict. They found him guilty of all 14 counts. 7 counts of economic espionage and 7 counts of theft of trade secrets. The jury had deliberated for over 3 hours. It was the first conviction on AI-related espionage charges in the United States. Linwei now faces up to 15 years in prison for each espionage count and 10 years for each trade secret count. As of the recording of this episode, he has not yet been sentenced. Linwei Ding didn't hack anything. He wasn't a hacker. He didn't exploit a vulnerability or breach a firewall. He walked through the front door with a badge that was given to him by Google. He sat down at a desk that they assigned him. and he used access that they granted freely. So this case goes to show that criminals aren't just trying to get in. Some of the most dangerous breaches don't come from outside the building. It sometimes comes from the person inside. That's all I got for today. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review wherever you're listening. It takes 2 seconds and it really does help more people find the show. Look out for the next episode and don't get got.